It was the autumn of 1999, and the internet felt like the Wild West. No rules, no moderation, no consequences. Back then, you didn't log in. You didn't make a profile. You didn't upload a photo or link an email. You typed a name into a blank field, hit enter, and suddenly you existed. Anonymous, untouchable, free. For some people, that freedom meant connection. For others, it meant permission. I was 20 years old, stuck in a small town where nothing ever happened. I worked a dead-end warehouse job, came home exhausted, fired up my clunky desktop computer, listened to the dial-up modem scream like it was being tortured, and escaped into HTML-coded chat rooms. That was my world, and it was crawling with creeps. These chat rooms had a feature called a whisper. Basically, the original DM. You still typed in the public chat, but only one person could see it. And creeps loved it, especially when it came to targeting girls and younger women. No images in the chat? No problem. They'd pressure you for your email address. And suddenly, there it was. So the regular users learned to fight back. We built our own communities outside the chat rooms. Primitive websites, member lists, warning boards, early internet etiquette rules. Ours was called the Attic. If you were active and vouched for, you were in. If you were a creep, you were exposed. And if someone crossed a line, we handled it ourselves. Sometimes that meant coordinating dozens of users to flood a creep's screen with whispered messages, copy-pasted over and over until their connection lagged so badly they rage quit. 95% of them disappeared, but not all of them. Some were slippery. That's where Farmer Bob comes in. I met my girlfriend through the Attic. We even had real-life meetups, once or twice a year. Internet. Strangers traveling across the country, just to hang out, party, and prove we were real people. She was legendary. Smart, sharp, creative. There was a running joke that she was more evil than the devil. Farmer Bob slipped into the community quietly. No red flags, no obvious creep behavior. He got endorsed, became trusted. Then the emails started. Younger members reporting uncomfortable. Messages, pressure, weird compliments, boundary crossing. So we decided to act. My girlfriend pretended to be a brand new user. Innocent, curious, slightly clueless. Farmer Bob took the bait instantly. Within hours, he was oversharing, bragging about his life, claiming he lived in the countryside, claiming he was wealthy because he owned a cattle farm. Hence the nickname, Farmer Bob. The more he talked, the clearer it became that this man was spectacularly stupid. No social awareness, no self-control, no critical thinking. He bragged about wearing wooden shoes, about how females loved sleeping with him while he wore them. Like that was somehow impressive. My girlfriend got bored, and when she gets bored, things escalate. She casually hinted that she might visit him. Maybe, but only if there was cocaine involved, because apparently it made her extra interested. We expected him to back out. Instead, he panicked. Suddenly, he couldn't afford it, despite being a wealthy farm owner an hour earlier. Then he slipped again. He said his parents would be out of town that weekend. Parents. On his farm. We were barely holding it together. That's when my girlfriend decided to go all in. She typed, completely straight-faced, that everyone knew you could make a cheap substitute by mixing baking soda and vanilla sugar. 3 parts to 1. Same rush, better taste. Way cheaper. We were sure, absolutely sure, this was where he'd realize he was being messed with. Instead, he thanked her. Said he'd forgotten about that trick. I still don't understand how you forget a fake cocaine recipe you never knew. She told him he needed to test it before she booked a train ticket. Quality control. He promised he'd make a batch that evening. We logged off laughing, assuming that was the end. 2 days later, an email arrived. All caps. Furious. Apparently his nose had started bleeding. Apparently he'd gone to a clinic. Apparently this was all her fault. I've never laughed harder. But we didn't stop. She told him he must have mixed it wrong. That she used it all the time for her side job. Which, according to her, was starring in amateur German spanking films sold to tourists. To prove it, we made a trailer. Low resolution. Awful sound. Terrible acting. Everyone fully dressed, clearly pretending. Wooden spoon noises. Fake accents. Nonsense German words shouted off-screen. It was ridiculous. It was obvious. It was fake. And Farmer Bob believed every second of it. He begged to buy more films. We agreed. On one condition. He had to try the homemade cocaine again. We never heard from him after that. No more emails. No more whispers. No more reports from users receiving messages from his address. He vanished. Maybe he realized the truth. Maybe embarrassment finally caught up to him. Maybe he crawled back into whatever hole produces people like that. All I know is this. In the lawless early days of the internet, one creep who thought anonymity made him invincible learned a painful lesson about trust, ego, and being confidently stupid. And honestly, I used theatrics to spite my bully. He was pretty dramatic about the whole thing. TLDR at the bottom. Prelude. When I was a young man of just 18, I got a job in the Canadian oil patch. It was my first real job. It was the early 2000s, and this paid $20 with no experience or education required. Min wage was sub $6. It was called well testing. Basically, you hook up a closed pressure tank and flare stack to new oil and gas wells, then flow them, gather data for the oil barons. It's hard work setting up and tearing down, but the rest is recording. Gauges and computer work. Not bad for a first job, except for fucking Gary. You work 2-man 12 HR or 4-man 24 HR crews, one laborer and one supervisor a shift. I was paired with a mean-spirited alcoholic in his mid-50s named Gary. He was overweight and lazy, only helping with things too heavy to lift on my own, like 250 LB pipes. He spent his days in the trailer for the most part anyway, watching DVDs, napping and hourly typing a bit of data into a PC. He also liked picking on me with jokes read, insults. I'm not a small man, about 6'1" in heels. He was noticeably smaller, yet while not physically intimidated, back then I lacked confidence and have a baby face. I got called stupid a lot. When he found out I had never used a power drill, he asked me, "Didn't your dad teach you anything?" I made the error of telling him my dad was only in my life a handful of years. The next time I made a mistake, he quipped, "No wonder my dad walked out on me." I did call him out on that. Like every other asshole alive, he'd tell me I couldn't take a joke. We always worked far out of town in the country. I often had to eat dinner with him in small town restaurants, mostly bars if we could help it. He drank a lot, could actually be personable when not at work, and he was at least too deep. He didn't stop and drank every night. It quickly became the case that I drove us to work in his truck. He made $1 or $1.10 per kilometer, and we could drive 350 kilometers per day, every day for weeks. 100 miles, 160 kilometers. FYI, I got minimum wage for travel time. He was hungover most mornings, didn't want to drive, and told me he was boss. He slept like a gin-bloated corpse until we got to work. I worked with him for 3 months. 3 months of demeaning treatment and verbal abuse. I don't react much. It's still true, everyone has their breaking point. I was very used to bullying by then. Long story, I just get silent. I also needed the job. I don't anything until I do, and I don't do nothing forever. Part 1, the power of love. The first step in my quest for vengeance was remembering that it's impossible to defeat evil with the power of love. Part 2, the power of terror. One night while we out of town on a job, during dinner, I mentioned to Gary, it's pretty lame he sleeps most of the time while I drive his truck and he gets paid. Maybe he ought to kick a few bucks my way for the effort. He didn't like my suggestion he be generous. The last hinge must have crumbled because he came unglued. More verbal abuse, and I was young. It actually reduced me to angry tears. When he threatened my job, it was a bad feeling, so I resolved to at least get away from him. I'd been taking notes because I wanted a different crew anyway. My breaking point was achieved. This is usually when my instinct for self-preservation diminishes and impulsive thoughts have fewer safeguards. I wanted to go home. Not revenge, but serendipity delivered the next morning. Gary was once again in his travel coma, and I drove us to work. About 30 kilometers from side of the highway on a pullout, was a semi-truck. Luck would also have it, it was running, and Trucker was outside his rig. I quickly formulated a plan. Gary always needed to be woken with intent, so he didn't stir when I stopped. Got out and asked the friendly driver for a favor. Trucker man agreed to my terms, got back in his semi to await the signal. Gary, blissfully sleeping, off the last of his nightly whiskey, also failed too. Notice when I maneuvered his truck. Parking it, we were nearly bumper to bumper, facing the big, beautiful Peterbilt. I lit the beacon. The truckers of Rohan answered with their own headlights, like the horn of Helm Hammerhand sounding in the deep. The trucker hit his air horn with amazing commitment to instilling fear. I did my part by honking. Gary's truck gleefully in respite and screaming my ass off. I cried bloody murder at blast level and yelled, "Fuck! We're gonna die!" Striking like a battalion of bombers singing a chorus of fire. The glorious cacophony lasted less than a minute. When it hit him, Gary dented the ceiling. Good thing he's thick as cement, or that might have hurt. He rocketed up with such force because the amount of shit he rapidly expelled into his pants kept him in debt to his own bowels until retirement. The wonderful sound of his anguished howls segued quickly into apoplexy and rage. While coming to terms with what I had done, he couldn't correctly choke out his death threats. I reversed, peeled off before he decided to get out to make good, and gave the trucker a wave. I got about 10 down the road when Gary felt the need to tell me he had dangerously high blood pressure and I could have killed him with a stroke. About 4 years later, I went to paramedic school. So yes, in hindsight, I agree with his assessment. Sucks for him at 18, I had legitimately no idea what a stroke was. What would I even do? Probably ignore him like they did with Stalin. I think he was just extra hungover, or being lazier than usual by pretending half his body was paralyzed, dead. I started laughing and told him he should probably calm down then. I said, "Can't you take a joke?" He kept making incomplete threats, and I just couldn't stop laughing, making it even funnier when he wouldn't shut up. Don't feed it, Gary. I love ugly laughing at angry people. I was a hyena. He was fighting the urge to kill me, and the desire to not stroke out simultaneously. The struggle was real. It took about 20 minutes more to get to site. That dance continued the whole time. I even asked him if that was his normal shade of red. Arriving, he ordered me to get out. Said I was fired, then stomped off to go call the company owner. Whatever. I had intermittent chuckles and smoked cigarettes while savoring my Pyrrhic victory for the 4 hours. It took the company owner to come pick me up. It was a medium-sized business, about 100 employees. He was the GM as well. I got some details. Gary wanted to involve the cops for attempted murder. Boss dissuaded him. Gary told one hell of a tale that left me looking like Satan. So, I told him all about the necessity of Gary's punishment on the way back to the city. He had a good chuckle about it. He was actually a decent guy. I worked for him until I went back to school. I got moved to a different crew where I could be the lone sociopath. That's about it. I did get some street cred with the rest of the boys at the company. TLDR, I tricked my work bully into thinking he was dying in a motor vehicle collision with a semi-truck.